For more on what the future holds for Europe's economies, we're joined by Nicholas Economides. He's a professor of economics at the Stern School of Business at New York University. Good to see you again. Thanks for coming in.
Good to see you, son.
Okay, let's talk about what today's GDP reading suggests about the region's overall economic health. What's your big takeaway?
It's better than the last few quarters, but still pretty low and significantly lower than other blocs, other countries like the United States, China, and so on. So it's generally Europe is in a relatively weak position.
Okay, put that a little more in perspective, if you will, comparing Europe and the EU to China, the United States, and the other nations out there in terms of their growth relative to other global economies.
Well, the United States has done pretty well, despite the various political upheavals and the fact that the administration is changing. Nevertheless, the United States is doing pretty well in terms of its economy. And unless there is some really radical, unpredicted policies imposed by the Trump administration, it's likely to do very well in the next 4 years as well. China had its problems, especially from the building sector. It's trying to take care of them. It's not doing spectacularly well like a few years ago, but it's still doing reasonably well. Now, Europe is doing significantly worse than both the United States and China. The reliance on cheap energy from Russia has gone away. It's not there available anymore. Fuel is much more expensive. Energy is much more expensive now in Europe. And this adds to the costs of manufacturing. Additionally, the push towards greening the economy, green energy, green cars, and so on,
EVs, batteries, right?
Yeah, has been kind of not managed correctly. Things were pushed too hard too quickly, and that created extra costs, and that also meant that many people were not willing to buy EVs, and other countries which have gone further ahead in EVs, like China, started importing Chinese EVs in Europe, and they have done well. So all these are bad things for Europe. I mean, right now, Europe is looking very carefully to find its new model for development. And there has been the Draghi proposal, for example, and other proposals out there.
Yeah, and that's going to be difficult, too, because the reimposition of Trump tariffs, that could have significant impact on Europe's trade and industries. Talk about the economic consequences if that happens.
Well, tariffs can be put in place for different countries, and it's not quite clear if there are going to be tariffs towards Europe. They're much more likely to be there towards China, but not necessarily towards Europe. So we will see how this works out. The way President Trump has worked in the past is propose a tariff as a threat, and then try to negotiate around it and see if the other side is willing to give something up or not. So I'm not so sure at all at what level the equilibrium tariff is going to be towards many countries, even towards China.
In terms of the carrot and the stick is quite often used in that case. Let's talk about some of the instability, because you talked about how there was a push in Europe, too much, too fast for EVs, solar power, batteries, and the negative effect there. But the political instability in France and Germany, the two largest economies in Europe, playing into this in a huge way.
Absolutely. Unfortunately for France, the problem is very, very difficult. The way we have gone that far for a couple of years that way, it's very difficult, and there is no simple way to solve it. There is too much spending, and people don't want to cut it. So that's a simple story. it's very difficult to get around that. In Germany, we saw the falling apart of the coalition government.
Right.
That's a serious problem as well. And I would say, additionally, in Brussels, you don't get a sense of a direction from Brussels, which can bring the EU out of the present crisis. And because of the war in Ukraine, the fact that Europe found itself without weapons in that situation has made it very difficult for them, for the Europeans, to be able to put together a coherent economic policy and a coherent military policy as well.